trying to bring negative emotions back into the fold. That they are welcome. First of all, they're arriving whether we want them or not. The nature of adolescent emotionality is that they're all over the map. And what I want to see as a sign of typical and healthy development is the kid's all over the map. What I don't like to see is a kid is down and stays down, because there's a lot of circulating myths about emotion. And I cover 3 big ones. One is emotion does not necessarily undermine reasoning. It usually informs our thinking. Another is that...
Hi, good peeps. This is the next episode of the Flexible Neurotic podcast. I'm Dr. Sarah Milken, the Flexible Neurotic. Today, I have a guest who you will want as your new BFF on speed dial if you have teenagers or you know any. She's a mom of 2 teen girls, 12 and 19, so she's living it herself. She's recognized as a thought leader by the American Psychological Association. She's recognized as a thought leader by the American Psychological Association. She co-hosts the Ask Lisa podcast, where she dives into all things teenager and psychology and parenting. She writes about adolescence for the New York Times in her column. She appears as a regular contributor to CBS News and works in collaboration with UNICEF. She's the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Untangled, Guiding Teenage Girls Through 7 Transitions into Adulthood and Under Pressure, Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls, and the soon-to-be-published The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, Raising Connected, Capable, and Compassionate Adolescents. This is the book we're going to dive into today. She maintains a clinical practice and also speaks to schools and professional organizations and corporate groups around the world on the topics of child and adolescent development, family mental health, and adult well-being. She has her finger on the pulse with all the research and how the research translates into real life, into her own practice, consulting with schools and their students. She's on the ground. Her name is Dr. Lisa Damour. I am so happy to have you here. And her brand new book, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, Raising Connected, Capable, and Compassionate Adolescents, this book that we're going to dive into today. Okay, so we have that clip. Her name is Lisa Damour. Here we go. Hi, Lisa. I'm so happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh my gosh, we have so many questions, so much to talk about. We're going to dive in. The intention of this episode is to dive deep with Dr. Lisa and find out why teens act the way they do, the workings of their inner worlds, and some advice that we can all use on how we can coexist with our teenagers while enduring our own midlife psychological, hormonal, and physical mayhem as midlife women. Right, Lisa?
Yep.
How old are you, Lisa, if you don't mind my asking?
I am 52, so
Okay.
I am right in there with all of the parents of teenagers. I am
you get
working
it.
my way through menopause while also getting kids into college and have a middle schooler.
Oh my God. So you know it. You know, you're like on the ground, you're in it, you're living it in your house, in your practice. You're like teenager crazy dumb. Oh my God. You must be a very special soul.
Oh, that's very kind.
Yes, because I can barely handle my own 2, and I have 2 really good ones.
I love teenagers. And I wake up every day thinking, I can't believe this is my job. I can't believe I get to do this.
Now that is amazing. In your new book, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, that I was lucky enough to get a galley copy of to prep for this chat, it took me back to grad school as a real nerd, diving in, like writing notes in the margins, highlighting the whole thing. You talk about how powerful emotions are in our personal growth as being adults and being teenagers, and that having emotions is a feature, not a bug. And this has always been true. But lately, in the past decade, there's been this sort of dramatic shift where no one is supposed to feel anything. No one's supposed to be upset. Everyone's supposed to be happy and calm all the time. Tell me what's going on.
Well, I can't know for sure, but I will say, and I'm sure you saw this also in your work, it feels like this was underway before the pandemic. That one of the questions I raise in the book is whether the wellness industry doesn't have a heavy hand in this. of kind of marketing the idea or selling the idea that there is some emotional zen out there and you can get there and your kids can get there and then you can stay there. And I think that that may have set up an unrealistic and actually hugely unhelpful understanding of where emotion fits into our lives, and especially where negative emotions fit into our lives. And so I think that we were underway with this idea that, you're mentally healthy if you feel good. And so you got to try to feel good or not get upset. And then along came the pandemic and it just rocked our worlds. Really everybody felt horrible for months and months and months at a time. And I'll tell you, I feel like the aftermath of the pandemic has been an almost heightened sense of, okay, now let's have nothing disrupt us. Like now, when we get jostled, it feels so much worse because our worlds were rocked. Let's not get jostled at all. And so one of the things I did in this book is that the first chapter is about myths about emotion, because there's a lot of circulating myths about emotion. And I cover three big ones. One is emotion does not necessarily undermine reasoning. It usually informs our thinking. Another is that you can, it's not bad for your kids to have negative feelings, right? Which that one, just to rest on for a minute, I am wondrous and not at how worried parents are that their kid being upset is harmful to their child. That just the act of being upset is harmful. And so I want to reassure parents, no. In fact, it's often growth giving and useful, even though it's really uncomfortable for your kid and really uncomfortable for you. And then the third myth I tackle is that if a person's very emotional, and especially teenagers who are very emotional, that means that they're fragile, which it usually doesn't. So what I tried in this book, if I had one thing I would say that I'm trying to do in the book, I'm trying to bring negative emotions back into the fold, that they are welcome. First of all, they're arriving whether we want them or not, but to treat them as not something we need to be scared of as parents, not something we need to actually work to try to prevent or quickly banish, but to understand where all emotions, and bluntly, especially the negative ones, where they fit into our lives, where they fit into our kids' maturation, and to have a good set of strategies for handling them so we don't have to be scared when they come along.
Oh my God, we have to unpack that. There's like 17,000 good points in there. And I'm like, oh my God, I lived that my whole life. I think what's also interesting is that, when I was growing up and I failed a test or bombed a quiz, I couldn't text my mom. Like we had pay phones.
Yeah.
And so I think this immediate and 24-hour access has really changed the way we process information. Like I would have to sit with that all day, get through my day, go to the rest of my classes, chit chat with my friends, or go cry in the library or do whatever I needed to do. Otherwise, I was in the courtyard, like putting money in the payphone, trying to call my mom, which never really worked. So I think it's interesting how much social media has created this. I don't know. It's almost like my husband's like, I don't know what he calls it, but it's sort of like, why are you so available all the time? Why are the kids texting you about things that are happening throughout the day that would normally be talked about at dinner time? And he has a really good point. Not everything needs to be solved at that very second. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree completely. And I think about this a lot, that growing up as teenagers, we probably always had that, like, I want my mom feeling or I want my dad feeling, but we couldn't act on it. And there's nothing wrong with wanting your parent. But one of the things I want to say, just to frame my answer, and this is a big piece of what I'm trying to work on in this book, is kids talking with us, our kids talking with us about what has made them upset is one solution to helping them manage upset feelings. It is one of many, many, many possible solutions. And it's often not the best option. And that idea that getting your kid to tell you what's wrong and then you trying to help them with it should be put on equal footing with 20 other options for helping kids feel better, and some may be better. That idea also has sort of disappeared from the culture. What I am taking care of parents all the time, and what I'm hearing all the time is like, the solution is my kid is upset, my kid tells me what's wrong, I help my kid with what's wrong. And I don't think I'd thought about it until you just said it. Part of what has really fueled that the primacy of that as a solution is our kids can call us all the time and then we answer. And so when you were giving that example of like what we had to do in high school, you actually rattled off all sorts of other things at work, like going to a class and getting distracted and just taking your mind off for a while, going to the library and crying for a little bit. Not a bad solution. Crying is a form of expression that brings relief. Talking to your friends about it, finding a way to like crack up about it. Like there's all of these other, I'm going to call them regulatory strategies, right? That's what the whole book is about, helping kids regulate emotion. But they get shoved to the back by a kid's interest in discussing it with the parent. And also our belief as parents, like, oh, this must be the best solution. And so it's one of many, it has its place, but we don't want it to become the default for our kid or for us when it's time to regulate an emotion.
The funniest part is half the time they don't even want to hear what we have to say. Like you write about this in the book. It's like texting and dumping or texting and ghosting. Like my kid will be like, oh my God, such and such happened, or I got 8 out of 10 on my quiz. And then I'm like, oh, okay. Like, how do you feel about that? And then I don't hear from them for the rest of the day. And I'm like, okay, you just made me feel like shit. You have me worried about you. Your dad has no idea what's happening, is totally living his own life. And now you've infiltrated my nervous system and you're not responding.
It's true. And this is an age-old tactic of being a teenager. The defense, we call it the defensive externalization, which is I have an uncomfortable feeling, and the way I'm managing it is by making you have the uncomfortable feeling. And this works great for teenagers, not as comfortable for the parents, though it does help teenagers get through what are big and bumpy days, because being a teenager is just a hard thing. What it used to be, though, is you couldn't externalize till you saw your parent. You had to sort of like run into them at dinner and be like, I failed my test, don't want to talk about it. And now, I mean, it's incredible how beautifully designed texting is for dumping an uncomfortable experience on the parent. But I think part of what I want to underscore is usually the kid who has dumped that on the parent, I think almost like cell phones are almost like trash chutes. They've thrown it down the chute. You've got the trash. They don't want the trash back. What we need to reassure ourselves as parents is we now feel terrible, like you described. That's probably an indication the kid probably feels much better. And so whatever else we can think, okay, I'm doing a service. I'm going to have my day disrupted so that you can get on the rest of your day.
What's really funny is I actually told my kids, I was like, don't text me unless you have red receipts on. Because if you're infiltrating my day and I need to tell you something, or I feel like I have something to say, I want to know you read it. You may not need to write an entire manifesto responding to me, but I want to know you read it. So at least we've agreed to those terms of like, you dumped your shit on me. I responded and I know you read it. And they're like, oh my God, Mom.
But let me unpack that because it's absolutely beautiful. So one of the tensions that comes to mind as you describe this is, on the one hand, teenagers get to be teenagers, right? It is super hard to be a teenager. They have feelings, coming out of every pore. Those feelings are supercharged by the nature of their neurological development. Whatever it takes, to help them maintain a sense of equilibrium, like we got to be on board for that. That's the one side of it. The other side is we actually do want to raise teenagers who are thinking about the impact of their behavior on others and who are emotionally savvy and who have the capacity to take a beat and think, if I send this text to my mom or my dad, what is the ramification for them? Now, they're not always going to think about this, but what I love is that from your description, in a not hot moment, right? Sort of a separate moment, you were like, all right, this has got to be the arrangement. Like, it cannot just be a straight on dump. Like, I need to know that you've read my response or could read my response. So you're doing that education. And I feel like you found this beautiful compromise to the tension. Like, you're allowed to dump, but you also need to be thinking about, the fact that there has to be some level of a two-way street to this. You can't just ruin my day.
Totally. Because my husband's like at work, his day is not getting ruined.
Yep.
And I'm sitting here like this porous sponge collecting all of these emotions and feelings. What's funny is my son is 18. He's on the older side of being a senior. So now he's smart enough where he doesn't even dump shit anymore because he thinks like, okay, if I say something, that showing that I'm upset, I'm opening Pandora's box with her and she's going to go fucking crazy and I'm going to get 96 texts. So I'll just wait till later. My daughter's 16. She hasn't gotten there yet. So she just wants to pump and dump. You know what I mean?
That's pretty funny.
He just saves it.
But, at the end of the book, there's a section where I talk about me being the one who was about to use my texting to dump on my kid.
Oh my God. You know what's funny? I read that and I was actually going to text my daughter about like a doctor's appointment or something that would normally annoy her. And I was like, I'm not going to send that text.
We can wait. We can wait. And so I think, it's interesting. It was fun to construct the book because what I did in the organization of it is I actually saved for the very, very end the piece about parents managing their own emotions, which our listeners know is actually a major part of helping adolescents manage their emotions. And what I talked about, and I know you're in the college process with one of your kids, it was when I was in the college process with my older daughter, and I had this question that felt like on fire, super important about her applications. And she was at work. She had a great retail job, and it was in some ways her escape from the college process to go to her job. And I was about to text her with this pretty loaded question about where things stood with a particular aspect of her college process. And I don't know how it happened, but I managed to stop myself. I managed to think, okay, what's this going to feel like for her? She's standing at her job. She can't do anything about this. She's going to try to write me back. She's going to be taking care of customers. And so as much as we can notice that teenagers sometimes do this to us, we have to own that we do it right back to them. We get an anxiety, we get nervous about something, we get worried about something, we pick up our text, we fire it off, we feel better.
Totally.
So this isn't just a teenager thing with the easy ability to be.
Oh my God. What's really funny though, so I made the doctor's appointment for her. And because she told me she was free, but I know she doesn't like to get blood tests. So I was like, I'll just tell her about that later. So then yesterday she goes, why didn't you tell me about the doctor's appointment on Wednesday? I arranged to go to Pilates with blah, blah, or whatever. And I'm like, okay, but I was saving myself because you're mean sometimes. And I didn't want, and she goes, but I need advance notice. And I go, yeah, but I need to protect myself too, is I didn't want to be yelled at about the blood test. But I was very honest about it.
Yeah, no, it is. But again, this is the beauty of teenagers, right? The beauty of teenagers is that once they get past 14, they have the cognitive capacity to have that conversation where we're going to talk about my anxiety about how you were going to react to what I needed to tell you. And they can do that. They can stand back from themselves. They can stand back from the situation and observe it from lots of sides. And I think one of the things, I think about the ages of adolescence and which ones are so hard. And I talk a lot in the book about 13. And I don't say this in the book as directly as I'm going to say it here. I think 13 for girls and probably more 14 for boys is so hard. It is uniquely hard. And there's a lot going on. But one element of it is that usually 13-year-olds are still pretty concrete, right? They use concrete operations, as we say. So they cannot do what you were asking your daughter to do. They cannot stand back from themselves, consider their place in something, spin a situation around, look at it from lots of sides. They really do, even highly intelligent. It has nothing to do with how bright they are. They are just not cognitively able to look at things from lots of sides. And so what I hear from parents with 13-year-olds is they get into these really painful impasses where the kid's like, I need to go to a new school. And the parent is like, no. And the kid's like, nope, that's the decision. I have made it. There's no looking at this from other directions. And so what you're describing is you maximizing the neurological firepower that is suddenly on board once you have a 16-year-old. And it's really cool.
No, my kids are actually like mini adults because I think maybe it's me, maybe it's my background. I don't know, but I just expect a lot of them. It's like you expect a lot of me and I expect a lot of you. And I don't mean expectations like grades or anything like that, but it's like I give a lot of my day, a lot of my time to getting prescriptions and rereading college things and making sure this happens. Like you have to do your part too. Like this is a team. Like I don't work for you. You know, I'm not an Uber driver. I have my own life too. And like,
Mhm.
you need to think like when you make, this was before they both had driver's license, but I would say to my daughter, like, you're making a plan with someone during rush hour who lives on the other side of town. How do you think that
Yeah.
impacts me? That's an hour drive each way. That's 2 hours out of my day. Like, you need to think about that before you make those plans.
Mhm. You didn't, like, yell at her, right? I mean,
No,
that's the
no, no,
thing.
no.
But I think sometimes in those moments, and I get it when parents do feel that way, they aren't able to stand back from it enough to say, "Here's here's the situation in which you have put us, and
That's
we need
where
to."
my 6 paragraph texts come in. And I know you'd use that as one of the strategies in your book,
Mhm.
that sometimes you can't have the, face-to-face conversation.
Mm-mm.
That drama discussion yesterday with my daughter about the doctor's appointment and not enough notice and her Pilates and blah, blah, blah. That was all via text.
Mhm. Mhm. Which works.
And then
Texting
she
can
started
work.
getting really like kind of snarky with me. And I was
Mm,
like, I'm done now.
yeah,
So
we're
when
not
you're
doing this.
wanting to like comment with me with like a different attitude, we can like re-talk about this, but I'm like done being like killed, you know? And she stopped.
Mhm.
And then a few minutes later, she texted me about something else. And that leads me to another point that you make in your book is well, 2 points. You say, don't take it personally and don't hold a grudge. And that's really
It's
hard.
really hard. It's really hard. Okay, so yeah, so that is very much under the heading of, the nature of teenagers is they can be really unpleasant, and then the next minute they're like, you know, leaning into us in the sweetest of ways. And it can be hard because you're like, I'm still upset about what happened 5 minutes ago. And I'm not saying everywhere and always, but I think often what we need to realize is the teenagers do, in fact, move from mood to mood pretty quickly. And what happened 5 minutes ago to them may feel like ancient history. And we can miss out on some really good times with our kids if we're still sore about something. But the other thing I hear in what you're describing there of that interaction with your daughter and, the limit you set is you did something that I couldn't agree with more of just saying like, "You know what? We're not doing this. You're not talking to me this way." And one of the things I've observed, and I feel like I've observed it more in recent decades, is teenagers asking to be excused for behavior or parents excusing kids' behavior because there's a big feeling behind it. Like, "Well, I said that horrible thing because I was mad." And that somehow I think in some situations, the kid feels or the parent feels, "Well, if you were angry, then we can't touch what you did," right? Like, I'm not gonna question your feeling. And what I would say and what you did in that interaction is there's the feeling and there's how it's expressed. So all feelings are welcome, right? We can't get around, feelings. They're gonna happen. How they get expressed, though, needs to be managed. So your kid can be super mad at you, but they cannot trash you. Your kid can say, "I'm really angry," or "I'm not in a position to talk right now because I'm so mad at you." That's completely acceptable. But you can't trash people. You can't hit people. There's all sorts of things you can't do. But I've noticed, and I don't know if you've seen this too, where "Oh, I did that. It was because of my anxiety." And there can be this sense of like, so it's off limits to question the
Totally.
behavior.
I had 3
Yeah.
tests tomorrow and blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. And I'm like, okay,
Mm-mm.
well, I have a lot of shit going on too. And I'm not yelling down your throat and I'm not going to hold it against you. But I just want you to know that there is a boundary. Like
Yeah.
we might be tight, but I'm not your friend.
And you can be deeply upset. The issue is not the emotion. The issue is how it's being expressed. Like, I'm not taking issue with, I'm sure you're very upset about or worried about these upcoming tests. Like, that's to be understood. How you express that, we need to talk that through.
Totally. I mean, that's like the story of my life. And I told you my son, he's 18. So he's like, I'm not touching that shit with a 10-foot pole. He's like, I'm just going to let the red receipt handle it.
That's funny. That's
He's
funny.
smart enough for that. Okay, so you talk about this example in the book about there's a soccer tryout coming up and the mom every night is saying to the kid, you got to go work out, you have to get conditioned if you want to make the team, blah 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 blah. And the dad comes to you and is like, my wife's driving my son insane. What are the options here? It's like, we know we're not, as parents, we're not going to be able to handle the emotions of that the kid's going to have about not making the team. He's not going to be able to handle it. So you say there's kind of like 3 options at handling that situation.
So I'll fold them. I'll unfold them all. But here, like, just to like frame it up a little. This is the problem with being middle-aged and experienced. We can see stuff coming down the pike,
Oh
right?
my
So
God.
like,
It's like you have like a magic fucking ball and you're like, dude,
exactly.
I know.
This is going to be really bad, right? So in that situation, the family, the kid is not getting serious about getting ready for tryouts. And the parents know this kid really wants to be on the team, and they are holding this, tension of like, he's not getting ready and he's not doing, and he's going to hate it if he gets cut. And so they're trying to get out in front of it so that he doesn't have the bad outcome. And the reason they don't want him to have the bad outcome is largely because they love him, but also because they don't want to deal with his big upset feelings when he does have the bad outcome. Because who would want to do that, right? That's not fun in our homes. And so they're leaning on him, leaning on him, leaning on him. So what I offered by way of guidance, I was like, okay, you've got some options. One is you can keep leaning on this kid and see if that changes things. But one of the things I say a lot in my clinical practice is what you're doing isn't working. So I don't know that doing more of what you're doing is going to work. Another option is you could just say one more thing and leave it at that. You could just say, look, you and I both know you want to be on this team. You and I both know that showing up for tryouts, in peak condition is going to help you get there. We love you. We want you to have what you want, but we're going to leave it to you to sort this out, right? So just, kind of saying your last bit on that and then really stepping out. The other is just to let it go and see if the kid figures it out, right? See if the kid gets to tryouts and
How many of us really do that, Lisa?
It's so hard because what it means is that we have
natural consequences.
Absolutely. And the reality, and this is why I wrote this book, is when your kid's facing natural consequences, so are you. I mean, the kid goes home and the night is blown
I
up.
didn't want my daughter to yell at me about the blood test.
Oh, no, exactly.
I knew it was going to happen.
So of course we're going to try to prevent it. But I think then the thing that in that third, it kind of goes with the second and the third. If the kid blows it, right? Let's say the kid blows it. Like he just does not get it together to prepare himself for tryouts and he ends up cut from the team and he comes home super duper upset. Then what the parent needs to be prepared to do is one, be very kind and present and validating, right? Not say, I told you so or whatever. That doesn't help kids in that moment. And then the other is to maintain, and I almost feel like I wish this were like a banner that I could, like put on billboards and, which is our job is to try to maintain a steady presence, right? If we get as upset as our kids are getting, or if we get more upset than our kids are getting, even if we feel that way inside, right? Which we may very well, it's actually quite frightening to them. Because think about this kid, let's say he's a 10th grader and he's 15. So for him, getting cut from the team is devastating, but it feels like a 15-year-old size problem. If he comes home and we, the parents, are as devastated or on the ceiling or beside ourselves about it, to him, he's thinking, oh my gosh, I thought this was like a 15-year-old size problem. You mean this is a 52-year-old size problem? It actually gets scarier. So the delicate line we need to walk as parents when our kids are very upset is to both make ourselves available lovingly, attentively, empathically, steady presence, while also not getting there with them, because that doesn't help them either. And if we are very upset, we need to find a way to talk to a friend or a partner or someone else so that we can do the job of serving as a containing function for our kid.
I also think that making something a 52-year-old problem is sort of going in what we were talking about before when you have that kind of midlife experience. Like, the kid's not going to die from not making the team, and you might be thinking, okay, he didn't make the team, which means he's not going to be able to write that he was on the soccer team for his college application. So he's not going to look like a well-rounded kid. And then maybe he doesn't get into the college of his dreams. I mean, it's like this whole domino thing that we kind of play out in our heads. I mean, there might be a nugget of truth in some of it, but most of the time not.
Most of the time not. And I think, the thing I so feel for parents, and we are very much in this soup ourselves as parents, is it doesn't feel like kids have the same kind of margins for error that we used to, right? And it's not that it doesn't feel, it actually isn't the case. The kids have the same kind of margins for error where you could sort of course correct and be like, oh, actually, I'm not a soccer player. I'm going to go join the theater group. And of course, the kid can and should go find some new enterprise, right? Some new exciting thing. But I think especially for families where the kids are engaged in a very competitive application process, there doesn't feel like there's room for course corrections or changing, interest midstream. Like you kind of have to be really specialized and really good. And I think that can, like you say, creates this whole added pressure. All right, so how do we, where's the release valve? Where's the pressure valve? So, the college process is behind a huge amount of very amped up anxiety and stress in high school families. And the solution to that, not everyone likes, but there is a solution, which is if we say, okay, what if we stop thinking about the same 20 colleges that everybody talks about? What if we just let go of the idea that our kid has to go to? I mean, 20 may even be a larger number than people really do circulate in terms of the colleges they focus on. What if we open ourselves to the possibility that our kid won't be a viable applicant for one of those 20 applicant colleges? And in fact, even if they are, they still may not get into one of those 20 colleges.
Totally.
And then we start to look at the thousands of other extraordinary institutions that are in this country. And it's hard, I think, sometimes for people to make that shift, but that actually is the solution to the very, very, very ramped up college anxiety situation, is to say, there are so many good places where kids get incredible educations and go on to be incredible people beyond the 20.
I 100% agree with you. And I have that conversation with my kids all the time, but it's also really easy for me to say that, my husband and myself, because we both went to Ivy League schools. So my son's smart response is, it's really easy for you to say that. Look where you and dad went.
Mm-hmm.
It's different now. It's harder. It's this. And I agree with him. It's true. It is much harder than it used to be.
Absolutely.
Much harder. I don't think I would have gone to college at this point.
Well, okay, so this is the same. So interestingly, my husband and I both went to Ivy League schools. And so one of the things I said to my daughter, I went to Yale, and I was like, okay, number one, I would never get in today. Like, let me be really clear, ever. And then I said to her, you're way better than I ever was. If you want to apply, feel free to apply, but go down the street, buy yourself a lottery ticket while you're at it. And
totally.
Okay. Then the other thing I said, and I think teenagers need to hear these two things. Another thing I said is, getting into one of these schools isn't a ticket. I know people from my class, a couple are in jail for embezzling, a couple are dead from substance misuse. I mean, that there's no magic.
They're living in their parents' basement.
Yeah, there's nothing about these institutions that makes your life good because you went to that institution. The most useful thing, though, that I have found, and I kind of stumbled on this by accident. It's one of those things, like I say tons of stuff to teenagers, then sometimes I'm surprised. I'm like, oh, that seems to have landed. I didn't think that would matter to you so much. So one of the things that they don't know is that after about age 25 or 26, no one knows where you went to college unless you're the one bringing it up.
That's what my dad says. My dad goes, I'm a dentist. I went to Brooklyn College and then Temple University, and no one's ever asked me.
No one knows. No one knows. And I remember being in graduate school and having a dear friend, Catherine. She wasn't in my program because we would have come into the program together. She was in another program. And she was like, I was with her all the time. And one day I thought, I have no idea where Catherine went to college because it doesn't matter anymore. Like, it's completely disappeared. And so if you say to high schoolers, especially high school seniors, I promise you, once you get to 25 or 26, this goes away unless you are bringing it up. That is stunning information to them, because from where they sit, the view is where I get into college is somehow like tattooed somewhere on me and people will know forever. And so it's either a point of pride or a point of shame or somewhere in between. And that piece of information, which adults can readily confirm, like that you can start naming your very dear friends and you have no idea where they went to college, is a great gift to teenagers.
I know, but I think sometimes they don't actually believe it until they live it or until they see it. Or there's kids who go to these top colleges and hate them. And we hear about those too. because
Mhm.
they went to colleges that, that book, Excellent Sheep. It's like
Mhm.
you have this dream of going to the school, and you get there and you're kind of like, wait, this is what I gave up my entire high
Yeah.
school experience for. This is not what I signed up for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
No.
think the whole thing is fascinating. And I also think it kind of leads into this whole other area that I enjoyed in your book that was talking about the differences between pain, emotional discomfort, and trauma. Because I
Mhm.
feel like everything is deemed traumatic at this
Mhm.
point. But will
Mhm.
you tell us, like,
Yeah.
really, what is traumatic? Like, when do we have to get help for our kids?
So you can get help for your kids short of trauma, but I think it is really useful. And I get pretty wonky, at this point in the book, where I get very technical about
Very.
how psychologists talk about what trauma is. So you're right. Like this is very much a word that gets widely applied in ways that psychologists, that we don't feel is accurate, and that's fine. Like I'm not going to police people's language. They can, it's a word in the world. But when psychologists say trauma, what we mean is that a person went through an experience that outmatched their coping ability. So we can't actually, and this is how technical I get in the book, we can't actually say that any particular event is traumatic because it's not the event itself, it's the impact on the individual. So the example I give in the book is like, say two boys go for a hike and get lost in the woods, and they're lost overnight. It could easily happen that one of those boys comes back very upset, like it was awful, and the other boy comes back traumatized. So it's not like it's okay. It's not like there's trauma or nothing. The kid who's very upset, for some reason or another, and we have lots of ideas about why people have various abilities to cope with difficulty. He got upset, but he was able to cope with it. He was able to soothe himself enough, or he was able to distract himself enough, or he was able to comfort himself enough that he got through it without feeling shattered by the experience. Whereas the kid who comes back traumatized, something was, the nature of his endowment or something about him or the experience, maybe mapping onto past experience, he felt shattered by it. And the analogy I use in the book is it's the difference between a surge of water that tests a dam that holds, right? So the first kid's coping held that water at bay versus a surge of water that tests a dam and the dam bursts. And so what we want to be mindful of is situations we don't like for our kids to be distressed, but actually our kids can handle usually quite a bit of distress and learn to cope with it and even grow through that. But we don't like trauma. And the reason that comes up in the book is that I am really trying to make the case that most of the time, it does not harm your kid to be distressed. The exception being if that distress is happening at such a scale that it causes trauma, and trauma does harm people. It makes neurological changes. It can have lasting effects. It also is something people can come back from, right? We know that. We are great at treating it. We understand it much better than we used to. But there is a critical distinction between upsetting and traumatic in terms of its impact on the individual and how anxious we as parents need to be about our kids experiencing distress.
I think it's amazingly important to really see that difference because, like, as a mom, like when I would get those letters from sleepaway camp, right? Or I'd have like my call that's once every 2 weeks or whatever. I would be like at a level 10 as soon as I heard something negative. And my husband's like, what's wrong with you? He
Mm,
said the kid was mean. He didn't say the kid was like terrorizing him. But I think as a parent, it's very hard to turn off that all red flag button or
mhm.
all the emergency button, especially I think as a mom, because you
Yep.
hear somebody's being mean to your kid or your kid doesn't feel comfortable and your immediate response is, let me save them.
Yeah, absolutely. We're wired for that, right? We're wired to protect our kids. And there's value in that if there's real danger afoot. The challenge and the difficulty, and I'm hearing this from educators everywhere, is that most of how kids learn to navigate the world is by learning to navigate difficulty. And we as parents need to make the distinction between experiences that are uncomfortable for our kids and experiences that are unmanageable for our kids. If we are stepping in and preventing uncomfortable situations or solving them before they arise or solving them for the kid, here is the net effect. The net effect is our kid ends up with very little freedom and very little autonomy. And the reason for that is if I am a kid who feels like I cannot handle discomfort or I need to know everything's going to be okay before I take it on, what is available to me becomes extremely narrow. I can't do a lot of things. I can't go a lot of places. I can't try stuff that's unfamiliar. And my world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Whereas if, as parents, we can think, okay, it's uncomfortable, not unmanageable. So my job is actually to help my kid build distress tolerance, right? Do this thing and actually build coping and build the ability to withstand it. And I have 2 entire chapters on how to help your kid build with distress tolerance. The gift you give your kid is freedom, that they're like, I'm going to go to this place I've never been before, and it might be lousy. And I'm just going to take that chance because I can tolerate lousy, right? Like that's really the gift we want to give our kids. So I say that all by way of saying, when we're trying to get our kids out of uncomfortable situations, it's a loving gesture. It is a well-meaning gesture. And what I just want to help, like, kind of just spin out a few more steps is it's a well-meaning gesture with unintended consequences. And so what's the other well-meaning gesture that we could use in that moment instead? And that is really, can my kid handle it, or can my kid handle it with my help? And if they can, then my well-meaning gesture is to confer the capacity for tolerating distress, which comes with a great deal of freedom down the line.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I know, like, speaking of like my daughter this summer when she was away in New York for the summer program, there were a couple days where she was like, oh, like this or oh, that. And like she was really upset.
Yeah.
And I said to her, look, nothing is forever. If you tell me that you have to come home, that you're just going to die there, I will buy you a ticket tomorrow. I will get you home. And as soon as I said that, I know it sounds like I'm rescuing her,
No.
but as soon as I said that, because I know her so well, that if you give her that sort of emotional freedom and security all at the same time, that she's going to rise to the occasion and not be the kid who flew home. And she never came home. But sometimes knowing that someone's there to help you and you have this secure place at home and somebody knows that you just feel accounted for.
Yep. Yep. And what I think is so often the case with teenagers, and you did this so well in your interaction with her, is they both need to be taken very seriously in the moment, and they also need somebody to push pause on it. And so saying to her, I can get you a ticket for tomorrow. If that's something like, let's talk tomorrow, and if you need a ticket, I'll get you a ticket. I will tell you, for most of my work with teenagers, 24 hours, like, they don't even remember what it was that they were upset about.
Totally.
And so it's that moment though where you don't say, oh, tomorrow you won't even think about this. You say, okay, I hear how upset you are. Let's talk tomorrow and see where you're at. And if tomorrow you are here, I'm willing to act. For most kids, that threads the needle perfectly. You're both taking me seriously and you're not actually sweeping in and rescuing me yet.
Totally. And I feel like for some reason that has worked with both my kids. My husband, I have to say, I don't know if this is just a male female thing. He doesn't have the capacity for that. Not that he's not smart enough. He's brilliant. He's going to hate me for saying this, but he's more like, fucking deal with it. And I'm like, okay, but no, I'm a female and I know what it feels like to not feel heard and just want someone to give you, even if that virtual hug. So I'm the mom who's like, I'll give you a hug. I'll tell you I hear you. I'll tell you that I'll buy you a plane flight tomorrow. And I find that usually shuts it down pretty quickly. But he's like compartmentalizer, like, what's the problem? You're a little upset. We're going to move through this. Let's go. It's just kind of funny.
I don't remember what the topic was. It was something, but it was around the college process. And the 4 of us were sitting at dinner, and I think it was my college-age daughter, she's an applicant, expressed some, just real frustration and anxiety and distress about the process, which, is kind of a constant for the whole of it. And my husband, sweetest, wonderful, brilliant guy, he's like, you'll be fine.
Right. No, that's my husband's favorite phrase. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? That
so
really has no relevance here.
Well, so my daughter, who usually I try not to practice in the house, she just looks at me And I say to my husband, hold my beer. And then I'm like, and I do for her what I'm like, oh, honey, I know it. I know, and and it's like, it was just hilarious, right? It was just very, kind of, in our roles. But it was a very funny moment of just seeing, like, we all react in our ways.
Totally. And it reminds me of the part in the book where you talk about how we should always take open invitations to talk to teenagers. And
Mm,
I'm the queen of that. Like I could be running on a treadmill and my son calls to talk to me about something and he very rarely will call me, initiate a call. Like the treadmill stopped. And my husband's like, "Why did you interrupt your workout?" I'm like, "Because he needed to talk to me." And it's not about spoiling him, but it's about that there are certain moments when there's an opening and an invitation to talk, or like you talk about, like my daughter will come into our room at 11 o'clock at night and have diarrhea of the mouth. And it's like telling us every single thing that's ever happened in the course of her life. And my husband rolls over and goes to sleep. And my eyelids are like with toothpicks. I'm like trying to hold them up. And he's like, "Marin, can't we talk about that tomorrow?" And I'm like kicking him. Like,
yeah.
"No, we're talking about this right now."
Yeah. No, it's obviously there are limits,
Yes.
but
It's not that
but
often.
it's not that often. But here's what I will tell you that I feel really just incredibly grateful for. So I'm someone who, like, has a to-do list, loves getting it done, moves through things. I love things highly organized. I love my space just so. Um, and I started practicing before I had kids, and I early in my practice was caring for teenagers and their families. And so even before I had my first child, I was hearing from families like, "Oh my gosh, this goes so fast. Like, I can't believe she's already, a senior. I can't believe how quickly it went." And for me personally, as a parent, this was a huge gift because here I am then, I become a mom myself, and there's all of the intrusions and frustrations and bluntly annoyances of being a parent, right? Their shoes are everywhere. They
Oh, I have
want to
baseball
talk,
pants, dirty baseball pants.
right?
I'm
Like
like, "You
all of
wore
this stuff.
those. What?
Like,
On the
why are
kitchen
they here?
counter?"
Exactly. And and then they want to talk when, like, you don't want to talk. And then, you're hungry, but they're hungry too. So you feed them first. Like, I mean, there's all of these things that are just taxing, right? They're just taxing to us as parents. And I will tell you, I know myself. If I had not been doing the work of having parents say to me, "This goes so fast, this goes so fast." If I'd just been in another job where it just never came up, I would have been very controlling about this. I would have been like, "Why are your shoes here? You got to move your shoes. Don't put your shoes there." And I would have been really, really rigid. And for me, my refrain has always been, this is really a short-term opportunity slash problem, right? That my kid wants to talk to me when I'm busy, that my kid wants to leave their shoes there. And and for the shoes thing, I'm like, that's gonna solve itself, right? I mean, and it's not like they're everywhere, but they're not where I want them. And I'm like, that's gonna solve itself. And I would rather not be the nagging parent about that and just enjoy them knowing that that's gonna solve itself. And so I think, especially when we're so worried about teenagers, and especially in the wake of the pandemic, when teenagers have had such a number done on them, and here we are trying to think about what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Okay, well, what's good for teenagers is actually strong relationships with adults. Ideally their parents, but adults somewhere. And where do those strong relationships come from? Being ready to interact on their terms. And so now more than ever, I think we need to weigh the fact that it is often frustrating for us, it's often inconvenient for us, we may be very tired, against the fact that, like you say, if your kid doesn't often want to talk and that's when he wants to talk, and you really are saying that your commitment is to try to support your kid and support their psychological health over time, making ourselves available is a pretty short-term thing to have to do for a huge long-term benefit outcome.
I agree. And I tell my husband that all the time, but my husband just does it differently. Like he likes to have like the time in the jacuzzi with my son where nobody has a phone and they, talk about sports. And then my
Mhm,
son starts weaving in, personal things. So they just
mhm.
have like a different way of
Yep,
doing it. Mine is just a little bit more, like you say in your book, like I get in their traffic patterns.
yep, yep.
It's
And
like there's no way they're avoiding me.
yep, yep.
They know, they're like, "Oh my God, she's gonna be there." But I also think that brings up another point in your book that you talk about how we think as teenagers that they don't want us there. We think as teenagers that, we're annoying to them and all of those things. But you say that like the research does show that teenagers do want our presence. They may not want to be talking to us, but they do want our presence, and they do want boundaries, and they don't want to just be left to their own devices, even with all their hemming and hawing.
Yeah. So I'll tell you how I started to like be clued into this. And this is, I think, the benefit of taking care of many, many teenagers over many, many years, because then what happens is something that seems like very strange and unexpected that a teenager says. Then if 3 years later a different teenager says it, and then another 4 years, I'm like, okay, there's something to this. Like it's rare, but it's a pattern. And the pattern that emerged in my clinical work is that I would be caring for a teenager who, for all intents and purposes, was incredibly self-sufficient, just very, very capable, very, very mature, very able. And the teenager would complain to me that his or her parents weren't around enough, like that their parents were actually kind of, absent or otherwise preoccupied. Often, there was an issue or just didn't feel like the teenager wanted their company, so they were out doing their own thing. And initially, I was just sort of surprised by the complaint, like thinking, like, really, like you think teenagers would love it if we left them to their own devices. But then the other thing, and as they would do this, kind of share their like their wish that their parent was around more, I would find myself thinking, okay, but I'm like 100% sure that if they are around, you're ignoring them, right? That you are not actually making it a time of high interaction. And it really became clear to me, like, they want our steady presence. I wrote a piece about it, I referred to it as potted plant parenting. Like they want you there, they want to know where you are. They want your presence. Here's what they don't want. They don't want your agenda. And I think that that's something that is so true for teenagers, is that so often when they're interacting with adults, whether it's a teacher or a coach or a counselor or whatever, they're dealing with the adult's agenda. The adult comes into that with an agenda, and the teenager, because they're teenagers, kind of has to bend to the adult's agenda. And then they walk in the door and we're like, how are you doing on your homework? What is going on? Tell me about this. Tell me about that. And they're like, now you got your agenda. So I think we talked about steady presence when a kid is upset. I would also say agendaless presence. Like the gifts we can give our kids, steady presence and agendaless presence.
Oh, my kids are like, can you guys leave the fucking house? Like their friends are like, your parents are always home. And it's not like I'm watching them. It's like, we just happen to be homebodies and we're going to be here. So you could walk around us, you can pick a different space, do all the things. But the beauty of that is that we get to spend a lot of time picking the friends' brains.
Yeah.
Because the friends are more open to talk to other people's parents than their own. Like people tell me like, oh my God, Jake is so chatty. I'm like, really? That's funny. You know what I mean? I'm like, wow, he hasn't spoken to me in 2 weeks. Okay. But it's just funny how when you're in other people's houses, you get like a different sense of the kid. Because you're not going to say to someone else's mom, can you not ask me those annoying questions?
Right. It's, I gotta tell you, it's nothing makes me happier than when my kids' friends come over. Cause like, I'm obsessed with teenagers anyway. And then like, when I have like,
my kids' friends know that they're like getting into in-depth kitchen conversations.
Oh, see, my
kids
don't
mind it.
My kids are like, run right upstairs.
My kids leave the room and leave me with their friends. And they're like, come find me when you're done. Like, I can't deal with that, but I love it. And like you said, it's such a limited time frame that like, I'm soaking it up like minute by minute. I'm like, oh my God, senior year. Okay, wait, I want to get to something before I forget, because it is one of the main premises of your book and we've sort of touched on it, but you talk about this idea, like school is stressful for most kids in some capacity, whether it's socially, academically, all the things. But there are good aspects of stress. Like stress makes the world move. So why is stress good for our kids? And what kind of stress?
Yeah. So to widen the lens for a minute, just as we, where we started, like whereas we as a culture became very uneasy with negative emotions, I would say even before that, we became very uneasy with stress. That stress got a bad reputation. People came to talk about it like you want to avoid stress. It's bad for you. The term toxic stress, and there is such a thing as toxic stress, but not all stress is toxic, right? But they sort of became equated. And and I know that like from the psychology side, we're like, oh no, like stress, like that's not how we see it, right? And there are a couple of things that we've always known as long as we've studied stress. So one is you cannot get around it. That stress is going to happen under any condition where there is change. So, the people listening to us are parents, right? We all remember what it was like the first time you became a parent. It's like the most stressful thing in the world when a child
Oh,
comes into your home for the first time. It's wanted, it's wonderful, it's a great thing. It's hugely stressful because it's so much change. And with change comes the demand for adaptation, and adaptation is stressful. So the first thing we know about stress is like it's a done deal. Like don't spend your days trying to figure out how to get away from stress. Like that's not going to
well,
work for
because
you.
everyone's like, if you're stressed, it leads to inflammation and this and that. I'm like, I know, but I have two teenagers. I'm trying to do this podcast.
Yeah.
That's not realistic. Are there moments when you can have breaks in these sort of Zen relief spots? Yes, of course. But life in itself is stressful. You're in
It is.
traffic, you're going to the
Yeah.
market, somebody bumps into you. I mean,
You can't get around it. And most of the time, it's actually growth giving. So, having kids, right, has built out your capacity, my capacity in ways that just it wasn't available to us before. Now we can handle a whole lot of things that we probably couldn't have handled before. And the metaphor that actually works extremely well is to weightlifting. That when you want to gain muscle, you go to the gym, you pick up weights that are literally stressful. Like they actually feel bad. And that's how you know you're lifting the right
and
amount
then
of
you
weight.
get to failure and you're like collapsing.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. And hopefully not injuring yourself, but like
Yes.
you go out of your way to work at the limit that is going to cause you to require adaptation, right? Like you're doing that. Now, that's one part of weight training. The other part of weight training is resting and recovering so those muscles can actually consolidate all of that strength. So, yes, we have kids. Yes, we have podcasts. Yes, we have very busy lives that can at times be quite stressful. That is not a problem. It's only a problem if we don't have a capacity to rest and recover. So when stress does become toxic, you know this, I'm just going to articulate this. There's only two conditions where psychologists see stress as toxic. One is chronic stress, which is the stress without the recovery, just nonstop stress. And the other, which we've talked about, is trauma, where stress is at such a scale that it outmatches coping. Everything short of trauma and chronic stress is life, and often growth-giving life. And what's beautiful is when we tweak our understanding of stress and help our kids tweak their understanding of stress, you actually are less stressed by stressful experiences. Because if you have a big test and you're feeling really stressed about it and you believe that stress is bad for you, then you become stressed about the fact that you're stressed. Whereas if you have a big test and you're feeling really stressed about it and you understand that you are gaining capacity by going through this stressful experience, it's still stressful, but it actually has a reduced physiological impact because you're like, this is hard and it has a payoff in the same way that lifting a heavy weight is hard. And yet we are pretty impassive or comfortable even in the face of it because we know why we're doing it and that it has a payoff.
But what if you study your ass off for that test and you fail?
That stinks, right? So that happens. And then you may be very upset. And if you're a teenager, you may have a very hard time maintaining a sense of perspective about it. And then what we're going to watch. Okay, first off, if you study really hard for a test and you fail and you're very upset, that is enormously painful for you and painful for anyone who loves you. It is also evidence of your mental health. And what I mean by that is mental health is not that you feel good. It's that your feelings make sense given the context you're in. So if you failed the test you studied really hard for and you're upset, check that box. You're having the right reaction. Where we want to put our attention is what happens next. How does the kid cope with that distress? So do they cope by crying a little and feeling some relief, or going for a run and feeling some relief, or going in their room and playing their angry playlist and then feeling some relief? All of these are wonderful ways of coping that do not have a price tag attached to them. Or do they cope by smoking a bunch of weed or being a real jerk to that teacher or, bothering all their friends to see who else failed and making them feel bad, like all of these things, which are also coping, but come with a price tag. So the job for us as adults in this is not to think, oh my gosh, my kid's distressed. Oh no, right? Your kid's going to be distressed. You cannot get around this. The job for us as adults is, okay, my kid's a bit distressed. How's the coping going? Are we going down the adaptive, does no harm? Or are we going down the gives them relief, but does do harm road? That's the distinction we want to pay attention to, not the presence or absence of a kid being upset.
One of the things that you just touched on, which I think is one of the big takeaways of your book, at least for me, was, does this feeling make sense for what happened? And if it does make sense, it's typically not going to be a life or death situation. It's like, yes, this makes sense. I can file that in this is par for the course. I get dumped by my girlfriend or my boyfriend. I'm upset. That feeling makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think it goes again under the heading of distress is an important part of being a human being. And if you get dumped by someone and you feel nothing and you were into that relationship and that was important to you, something's wrong, right? You're supposed to be in pain. And we don't love for our kids to be in pain. Like, of course, we hate for our kids to be in pain. But it's through those experiences, so long as it doesn't reach, the level of trauma, that they then, discover who their real friends are, or they, figure out how to like soothe themselves in ways they didn't know they could, that they realize they can actually withstand quite a bit more than they thought they could, that there is growth in the context of distress. And in fact, I would even argue that's when we grow. Like when everything's awesome, we're not growing a whole lot. And I like for things to be awesome, but if we're really on the side of maturation and development, our kids are going to have to go through some things.
It makes me think of like, okay, that person peaked in high school. Do you know what I mean? Because like
Yeah.
I have a friend, for example, and she has a son who went to school with all these kids for all these years and then went on to the next school. And those same friends sort of kind of decided to move on with other friendships. And that kid, my friend's kid, he had never had that experience before.
Mhm.
He'd always been part of this pack and never been on the outside of the pack. So being on the outside of the pack, starting in like ninth grade, was like, whoa, I've never had this experience before. Where when she was talking to me about it, I was like, oh my God, my son like had so many of those experiences in elementary school. So then when he went on to middle school, he knew that like when something shitty happened or a friend was rude or whatever, like he wasn't going to die.
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
doesn't make it better. It's just that experience of having experienced it before and been okay
Yep. Yep.
helped him in middle school when he went to a new school and didn't 100% feel like he was like fully included all the time. He's like, okay, I go to school, I have these few friends, I go home and I'm okay. And cut to 6 months later, he has a million friends and is happy and blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have shitty days or a friend didn't betray him or my daughter or whoever, but they've had those experiences before. So what you're saying also is like, if you've never had those experiences like being dumped or whatever, and you're dumped in college for the first time, that's like,
Yeah.
whoa.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to have to learn this somewhere along the way, right? That you can go through something really painful and come out the other side of it. Um, and we don't want to keep our kids feeling like they can't manage very painful and intense experiences. And especially when there's so much we can do to support them through it without trying to prevent the distress.
Okay, what about stress and perfectionism with
Mm.
girls? I
Mm.
mean, oh my God. I mean, I
Yeah.
have one.
Mhm.
And I am one. So I know what it feels like to be that overstudier, to be
Yeah.
the kid who could write the test.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I've
Yeah.
studied so much. So what do you say to those parents with those girls who are studying and
Mhm.
restudying and writing the paper and editing? Like it seems like it doesn't stop.
Yeah. So this is something actually I spent quite a bit of time on this in a book I wrote that published in 2019 called Under Pressure about
Yes, I
stress and anxiety in
remember.
girls. And, the importance of helping girls start to be tactical about school and to make broad gender generalizations. Boys as a group tend to be more efficient at school. They will do what needs to be done and not much more, which makes their parents bananas, but is also actually pretty
Oh
good
my
for them,
God, my
especially.
son is
Yeah.
like a master of
Yeah.
that. Like path
They're
of
good.
least resistance, get my shit done
Yep.
and not stress about it.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be polished to a high shine, except for occasionally it does, and then you
Yes,
do it then.
yes.
Whereas girls as a group are inefficient, that they overwork, they do more than needs to be done, and they're anxious about doing any less. So one approach is to just talk with them about tactics. In this book, the way I walked up to this question actually had to do with a broader metaphor that I introduce about how we should think and talk about school with kids. And the metaphor I introduce is that we need to remember that school is like a buffet
I love
where,
this.
where kids are required to eat everything. And it really, it's such a simple metaphor that, I think really neutralizes a lot of very painful stuff, because we make kids feel bad if they don't like a particular subject, or we make kids feel bad if they don't want to do particular work. Yet you and I only eat my favorite subject anymore. I haven't touched certain things for
You
decades.
don't talk to shitty people that you don't
Yeah.
want to talk to.
Yeah.
I
Whereas
mean,
kids have to do it
bye-bye.
all. The kids have to do it all. And so I spend most of that section using that metaphor to talk about kids where motivation is low, right? Where they're struggling to stay motivated, and how this metaphor can actually neutralize those conversations about the fact that, yeah, well, they don't love broccoli, they don't love whatever it is, but they still got to eat some because they're a sophomore, right? And the ways in which it can help. But I also do think that you can extend that metaphor to kids who are compulsively feeling like the best students eat it all and eat as much as can be consumed. And that this is somehow gratifying. And the problem is, it often is gratifying to, there are teachers who are like, my stuff is the best, and the more you eat of it, the happier I am. And kids pick that up. And it's not all teachers by any means, but there's certainly some. And so one of the ways that we can actually talk about it with kids who are overdoing it is to say, listen, if you love math and you want as many helpings of that as you can get, go for it. Knock yourself out. But if, social studies isn't your favorite, why don't you consume as much as you have to get the mastery or the grade you want, or both? But don't overdo it. You don't have to clean your plate in every class. And really giving kids permission to think about where their appetite is, where their tastes are, where their leanings are. Also recognizing those will change over time, that they shouldn't count things out. But it's a way to say, you don't have to like it all. You certainly don't have to pretend to like it all, because I think sometimes we ask that of kids. And you actually don't even have to eat it all. If you don't like it all, just eat as much as you have to and leave it at that.
And what about, there's an example in the book, you talk about this dad who's like, Dr. Lisa, I have this hard driving junior. She's going
Mm.
at the schoolwork all the time, and 2 to 3 days a week, she's having kind of a quote mental
Mm-hmm.
breakdown, and she's hysterical. And he asks you, is she depressed? And
Yeah.
you say, okay, these are the questions you have to ask yourself. Number 1, is she sleeping and eating normally?
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, does she still enjoy watching her favorite TV shows and hanging out with her friends? 3, is there a legitimate reason for her being in tears? She got a bad grade, or she did 6 hours of homework. Is she irritable? Because you say that a more common symptom in depression for teens is irritability more than it is for adults.
Mm-hmm.
And then what does he say to you, and how do you respond?
Well, so he actually, his answers are very reassuring. He's like, when she's upset, there's a reason, right? And one of the ways we make a distinction between sadness and depression is, in sadness, you're sad about something, and depression, you're sad about everything, right? And so, it's very much tied to actual things that have occurred in the moment. It is not interfering with her ability to sleep or eat. It's not changing it. There's no loss of pleasure in other things. One of the things we worry about in depression is when a person reports that they, not only does everything feel bad, the things that they used to do that felt good, even those don't feel good, right? That is a very, for me, a very big red flag, and one of the diagnostic criteria for depression. We look for other things, and I didn't do the full rundown, but
Right.
concentration and, whether there's affect at all. But his his responses were largely assuring. And what I said to him is, look, like being a teenager comes with like really intense ups and downs. Like that's actually the nature of adolescent emotionality, is that they're all over the map. And what I want to see as a sign of typical and healthy development is the kid's all over the map. What I don't like to see is a kid is down and stays down, right? That's very concerning, or is irritable and stays really irritable. And he also, it was so sweet. I have such a vivid memory of this conversation when I said, is she irritable? Because that's really a cardinal
He's
symptom
like,
of
when is she not irritable?
No, he said it was so sweet. He softened and he said, no more irritable than I remember being as a teenager. And I just thought it was such a loving and also fair, response. But I think what is scary, and this came up in this vignette that I shared, that she would occasionally say, and teenagers do this, things that really scared them, like, I don't want to be here anymore, things
Yeah.
like that. And teenagers do that, and especially with our, very heightened awareness of suicide among adolescents. When they do stuff like that, it's never been comfortable, but it's, I think, scarier now than it ever was. And so I said to him, you can ask, right? And you should ask. So if your kid says, I don't want to be here anymore, or, something, or even more direct, like I could kill myself or whatever, parents should just say, okay, I heard what you said. Now, is this something you're really thinking about, or are you letting me know how upset you are? And most times teenagers will say, oh, no, I'm not thinking about hurting myself really or taking my life. I'm just super upset. Okay, then you go have that conversation about super
Right.
upset. And I give more detailed language in the book about how to really chase this conversation down. And what I want to say here is parents worry that if they ask about it, they're going to make it more true. And what I want people to know from the research, and we have good research on this, asking a teenager who is not suicidal if they are thinking about harming themselves or ending their lives does not make them more likely to do so. Asking a teenager who is thinking about suicide actually comes to them as a great relief. So if you have reason to be worried about this, and I want to come back to that, you can ask. And the reason I say if you have reason is sometimes it's hard to know. And there's so many headlines that have parents very, very scared. That I did have one teenage girl share with me, and I felt for both her and her mom so deeply in this interaction, where she said, gosh, if I tell my mom anything I'm upset about, at the end of the conversation, she says, you're not going to kill yourself, are you? And I thought, right. I feel for the kid, because the kid's like, no, I mean, I was just trying to tell you about my day. But I also feel for the parent, because like with the headlines making adolescent suicide feel so, prevalent and frightening. I get it. So the way to do it, if you're like, I'm not sure, I don't want to be the parent who's like, seems to be bringing it up in this way that makes no sense. The way to consider doing it is to say to your kid, if your kid scares you, right, either just their mood is really rocky or something, just you've got this worry on your mind, go ahead and say something like, okay, this may seem super out of the blue, and I hope you don't mind me asking, but something about the way you're talking, something about the way you said, I just need to ask, like, are you thinking about hurting yourself or ending your life? And make room for the kid to be like, no, what? Where's that coming from? And honor that may seem like a very strange or unexpected question, but you can ask. You can ask.
I mean, but is the kid most of the time, going to say yes if it is in fact the case?
So here's what I can say. Either the kid will say, no, like truly reassuring, like, oh, no, I'm fine. Like, and they will mean it, and the parent will know it, and there will be no reason to worry. Sometimes the kid will be like, I don't know. Right. And leave it in this kind of vague place, at which point you say, okay, great. We're calling your pediatrician, or we're going to the ER. Like, we don't do the, we'll just see how
wait and see.
We'll wait. We're not going to wait and see. Sometimes kids will say, yeah, no, I am thinking about it. At which point, again, you are going to your pediatrician, you're calling, or going to the ER. Is there a version of this story, and this is the hardest thing to talk about, where a kid entirely hides this? Yeah, that happens. It's exceedingly rare, but it happens. And what I want parents to know, though, is that when kids are suicidal, overwhelmingly, that occurs in the context of feeling very depressed, or having a substance problem, or having another psychiatric concern. Um, I don't want parents to feel like this is just this alarming
Out of
thing
the
that
blue.
out of the blue all the time. Like that is very, very, very rare and scary for parents. And I really empathize with that.
No, I appreciate that. And I do think that because of the headlines and stress and
Mhm.
college and this and the pressure, sometimes you wonder, like, is everything okay here?
Yeah. It's
You
how can you
know,
not be
it's,
scared as
yeah,
a
you're just
parent?
a regular parent having
Yeah.
regular
Yeah.
problems. I feel it. Now, in terms of kind of segueing into another topic before we wrap up, I want to talk about teens and self-esteem,
Mhm.
because you talk about in your book how, we're so many of us are focused on kids doing well in school and getting good grades and all of these things. And you talk about how teenagers need to create or find
Mhm.
environments that are outside of school
Mhm.
that really help sort of develop those feelings of self-esteem of like, yes, I matter, I make sense, I'm relevant.
Mhm. I do, and I'll tell you where I came to this in my clinical work, even though I don't this isn't in the book, but just in terms of, like, the backstory of how I came to appreciate the importance of non-school, non-college stuff as being important to kids for self-esteem. Um, I took care of, over time, several extremely high functioning it was teenage girls, extremely high functioning, and they were crushing it by every measure in high school and then going to, the one of the 20 colleges and crushing it in one of the 20 colleges. And I had the honor, I mean, I've practiced in the same community for 23 years. So I've gotten to watch, I've cared for people over very long arcs of development. I've had the honor on a few different occasions of watching those young women come back and get jobs that are very much of interest to them or do things that no one saw coming, whip a office into shape that people were really it was chaotic before they got there. And it was only when they did something that was of their own making, only when they did something that was not doing an extremely good job of following the lines laid out for them, that I saw self-esteem consolidate in them, that real pride. But, on paper, like, they should have had self-esteem for days. But it was only when it was of their own invention that or it really belonged to them, that it really seemed to shore up a sense of self-esteem. So I do think about and then I've watched this in younger parts of development where, like, yeah, it feels good for kids to get an A on the thing they were told to get an A on, but they were still doing what was told. And so I'm always interested if we really want kids to have self-esteem, I'm interested in them doing stuff that they care about and is of their own invention or for their own interests, and that they can take a tremendous pride in its own right. So I'll give you a couple examples. So one, I loved this. This girl was like a fabulous violinist and played with, like local youth orchestra, was incredibly talented. But her real pride came from figuring out how to play pop songs on her violin on her own time. Right? Or kids who do, like, incredible service work, and, like, it may or may not end up on their college application, but, like, they take huge personal pleasure in it, and they chose it, and it's of something they care about. Or kids who have, like, quirky hobbies, who are, like, really into origami and are
Ukulele.
yeah, like
Yeah.
origami or ukulele or, like, these things where, like, they just develop the skill, and it belongs to them. And that's something I think we wanna look for opportunities if it's all for the college application,
Oh,
I think it actually undercuts the kid's ability to take joy and pleasure in it.
it's interesting that we're talking about this because, like, I don't cook at all. I hate it. There's nothing more in the world that I hate. I'm terrible at it. I have no interest in it. And my daughter took up cooking during the pandemic, and
Mm.
that's become like
Yeah,
her thing. She's
yeah.
like cooking for the family. She's da 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 da. And it's not something that anyone else in this house does. It's like her own identity. She has her own little like Instagram that goes with it. And that brings her so much like sense of self-worth. And her friends come over. And sometimes instead of going out to dinner, she's like making salmon.
I've got goosebumps. No, this is that what a perfect example, right? And it comes from within
Yeah. If
her.
I told her
Yeah.
to take up cooking, she would have been like, what?
What?
What are you
No.
talking
Yeah,
about? No.
yeah. I love that example. I
But
love that
what
example.
happens to the parent who's like, Lisa, but my kid's not doing that on their
Yeah,
own. They're just
yeah.
scrolling TikTok. Should I be like presenting ideas? Should I have them be dabbling in things? Where do you draw that line of where the kid generates it on their own?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You can't make them, right? And that's one of the
Ugh,
hard things about being a parent. But the other thing is true, and you know this, teenagers change fast, right? And
yeah.
sparks turn into flames with them very, very fast. I guess what I would say is, your kids shouldn't be spending so much time online that they're not doing other stuff. And I believe very strongly it's good for kids to be busy, and busy with lots of things, partly because it just makes it harder for them to be on TikTok all day. And some TikTok is fine, but all day is not so fine. I think, of course, where that hits the limit is the overscheduled kid. But I will say there's a lot of room between the kid who doesn't have nearly enough going on to keep themselves busy and the kid who is overscheduled, and
Yeah.
you want your kid in that space.
Whew. Okay, let's talk about quickly separation and individuation. Okay. I mean, that's like
Yeah.
a 5-hour episode, but
Yep.
quickly, I mean, you basically talk about how your kid's looking for a rebrand. They're not just Sarah's daughter, they're Marin, they're Jake, they're blah, blah,
Yep.
blah.
Yep.
And so it's like I have my midlife self with my midlife remix and my midlife rebrand. I'm not a stay-at-home mom as much anymore. I'm doing a podcast too. And then my daughter's like, and I'm not just your daughter, I'm me too. And so you have these
Mhm.
like two things going on at the same time.
Mhm.
How do we live in the same house?
It's really hard. This is, I would say, one of the other reasons 13 is so hard is I think it hits really hard around age
Yeah.
13. So here's the lowdown. So the technical terminology we use is separation and individuation. But what I called this section of the book is why your teen can't stand how you chew. Because I think that's
Oh,
what it really feels like at
I
home.
can't chew. I can't
No,
breathe.
no, your
Why am
blinking
I
is
biting on my
annoying.
spoon when I'm
Yeah,
eating soup?
yep, yep. So if we think about it from the separation side, they're trying to become their own person. And so what they feel is anything that we do that is not in the version of themselves that they see themselves wanting to be is annoying to them, right? So if we um actually let me take this another way. If we think about it in that anything we do that is like the version of they want themselves to be, right? This is the separation side. So in my own home, I have always liked Beyonce. I've long liked Beyonce. And when my older daughter was 13, I was in the kitchen bopping to Beyonce, and she comes in and she's like, Mom, stop, right? Because Beyonce was now hers. And we could not be separate and share Beyonce. So Beyonce, that was something that was like how she saw herself, and it was no longer on the table for me. And then because they are not separate enough yet, because we are very much, kind of entwined when they're
Yes.
younger, anything we do that is not like how they see themselves, like whether it's what we're wearing or, how we breathe, how, like, or, our chuckle or, our jazzy dance moves is so painful to them because it does not fit with their version of themselves that's emerging. So here's the long and short of it. Anything we do that is like how they see themselves becoming is annoying to them. Anything that we do that is unlike how they see themselves becoming is annoying to them. The sum total of this is everything we do is annoying. But it goes away. And this is what's so cool is that by late 14, 15, 16, kids start to get a sense of an identity, a consolidated brand, as I talk about it in the book. And then they feel distinct enough that they're like, okay, whatever your problems with your brand are, those are your problems with your brand. They do not
she's like,
reflect on my brand.
she's her favorite thing to say is that's a you problem.
Beautiful.
I'm like, all right,
Okay.
okay.
Right. But
And
at
her new
13,
thing
there's no
is,
you problem. We're still
yeah,
taking up too much, sharing too much
she
space.
goes, why have you gotten the same nail color as me the past 2 times? Are you obsessed with me? I'm like, I'm totally obsessed with you. And she's like, I'm going to hide my nail color next time. And I'm like, okay, you
Okay,
do that.
fine.
But it's
Do what
just,
you got to
it's
do.
interesting with her because we're really tight. And I know she's like sort of obsessed with me in one hand. And then on the other hand, she's like, your chewing makes me cringe.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's this always, but like, I'm going to be 48 and my mom still bugs me.
Yep. Yep. No,
And
I
I'm
think
like,
that the separation individuation goes on forever.
it's like forever.
Yeah, like it's too close and yet, you can't be different enough.
Yeah. It's like, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my God, mom, don't ask me that. That's so weird. Like, what? Okay, wait. I have this little list here. So I could talk to you for 15 more hours, but there were like a bunch of other things that came out in your book that I feel like I want to rapid fire on
Okay.
you. And I want you to kind of like comment on each one. I know that each one could go on for paragraphs, but I just feel like I can't leave this podcast having not addressed them
Okay.
because I'm OCD. Okay, here we go. Number one, teenagers like novelty. Accept that and try to go through backup plans with them for when things could go wrong.
So teenagers are more risky in their behavior than kids or adults. And what we don't want them to be doing is getting into a risky situation and then trying to figure it out on the fly. So to the degree that you can say, okay, you are going to that party, I guess you're going to that party. If things go sideways at the party, what's the plan? To the degree you can make that plan before they're in the situation, better than them trying to figure it out in the heat of the moment.
Love it. Two, teenagers pretend that they don't want you to have high standards and expectations, but they do.
Teenagers live up to expectations and they live down to them too. And so when we treat our teenagers as the wise, philosophical, thoughtful, careful, mature young people they are or can be, they tend to meet us there.
Number three, teens do want your attention and presence, although they may not show it to you and they just want you to be invisible.
Yep, they like knowing where we are. And one of the analogies is when we look at toddlers who are exploring the world, often they will come back and touch the parent's knee without even looking at the parent before going off and exploring again. I think teenagers feel more safe reaching out into the world if they know that the safe base is at home.
That was sort of going back to me going, I'll buy you a plane ticket tomorrow if you
Yep.
want to come home.
Yep.
Sometimes you just need that like extra nudge. We talked about this before. Don't hold a grudge if they make a snarky remark or you have hurt feelings. It's usually not personal.
Yep. But you can say, hey, I don't talk to you that way. You can't talk to me that way. Try again.
Okay. Number five, it's a lot less personal than you think.
It is adolescence. Adolescence is something they are going through. It is not something they are doing to you.
Is that what people say about us midlifers and menopausers?
Right. I'm going through it. I'm not doing it to you. Feels like I'm doing it to you, but it's actually something I'm trying to find my way through.
Okay. Six, be okay when they text and dump something and sort of feel like you got ghosted. I failed a test and then you respond to them. I'm so sorry. And then you don't get a response.
Yep. Usually means they feel better.
Perfect. Seven, sometimes they just want to hear that must really suck, not a monologue on how to fix their problems.
Let me put it another way. They almost never want a monologue on how to fix their problems. Almost always what kids are looking for is curiosity and empathy. And so when I am very tired and it's the end of the day and one of my kids is complaining, I say to them, tell me more about what's going on. And then I usually say, oh man, that stinks. And usually they got everything they needed and that's all I needed to do.
Oh, so good. But when my husband does that to me, I like get pissed. But that's okay.
When he tries to give you advice.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's both. It's like sometimes I want the advice and sometimes I just want him to listen, but he never picks the right one. He's supposed to be a mind reader.
Yeah, what's wrong with him?
I know. Come on. Okay. Empathy goes a long way with teens.
Yep. Just saying, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. It also makes it clear, like, I'm not scared of that upset feeling, and you don't need to be scared of it either.
That makes it a 15-year-old problem and not a 52-year-old
Keeps
problem.
it at a 15-year-old problem.
Love that. If they're having a shit day, let them distract themselves with bad TV or take it upon yourself to order their favorite takeout and help distract them.
Distractions go further than we think, obviously within limits, but sometimes if you're struggling with something, taking your mind off of it is a bit of a solution. Comforts go really far for teens. They feel everything more intensely, so nice stuff feels that much nicer for them. So getting their favorite takeout goes further for them than it does for us and can be a solution to a bad day.
Love it. 10. If you can't have the face-to-face chat about the important topics, do it in the car when you're not looking at each other or text.
Absolutely. Kids do not like being in the hot seat, and those are two strategies for keeping them out of it.
Okay, your teens are watching you and your teens are watching you, so do what you say.
Yeah, a huge part of how we teach healthy emotion regulation is that we actually model it in our own lives. So instead of saying like, oh my God, I had the worst day ever, where's the beer? We say, I had the worst day ever, let's go for a walk.
I also think it's interesting because like sometimes, if my daughter's having like girl issues or whatever, I'll say like, oh my God, so-and-so had this birthday party and she didn't invite me. And I try to explain that like even adults have stuff too. It's not like you graduate from being a kid and then being an adult is perfect.
Exactly.
Take an interest in your teens' turmoil while giving them time and space. I'm not really good at the time and space. I'm working on that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the heading of like, if we react very abruptly and aggressively, it's scary to them. It makes it seem like it must be a very, very bad situation.
Okay, teenage narcissism is normal.
I don't use the term narcissism in the book,
Okay,
but they are
yes.
definitely like a little preoccupied with themselves. That is the nature of adolescence, and it is normal.
Okay, is that the same for midlife women too?
Maybe.
Instead of asking what they think of the new math teacher, ask what's the word on the street about the new math teacher. I love that one.
Some kids do better with displacement, and that again we can file under don't put them on the hot seat. So instead of what do you think, like what are kids saying?
I love it. If your teen wants to talk about the same thing over and over again, like maybe they're afraid they're going to die or something bad's going to happen, you give this example that you give a specific hour of the day where that's allotted to talking about that issue.
That's one strategy. If a kid is really stuck in a mental rut, is actually trying to put some parameters around how much they can talk or think about it. And the reason for that is it can bend into what we call rumination, where you're thinking and talking about something in a way that becomes the equivalent of picking at a wound, and it doesn't make it better.
And I feel like girls in rumination station is like, whew.
Yeah, no, we see
I
that
think
in
I
the data.
invented rumination.
Yeah.
Listening to music and playing sports, you say, is a huge release for them.
Yep, it's part of how kids regulate emotions. And again, back to what we said, like talking about feelings is one option. They have a lot of other strategies they use to help their feelings be manageable.
Parents make mistakes.
We do, and we should apologize when we do.
Just because teens are emotional doesn't mean they're fragile.
They are built to withstand far more distress than we give them credit for, and it's good for them and helps them grow.
Gosh, just because teens are emotional doesn't mean, I already said that. Talk to your teens about porn or someone else will.
Or they won't talk about it with anybody. We have new data. I mean, that by 13, most kids have seen porn. By 17, 3/4 of teens have seen porn. They don't raise it with adults. We need to have conversations with them. And I give you language in the book for how to have those conversations.
Yeah, we're going to save that one for another episode because I've already been down that road 10,000 times. My kids are like, okay, can you not talk about that anymore? We've already discussed that. I'm like, okay, as long as you've got that clear. You talk about trying to keep technology out of the bedroom, like in the evening. How successful are you that with older kids?
It's a lot easier if you start it when they're young, and it's a lot easier if you make it a house rule.
Got it.
So if you don't have tech in your bedroom and it is understood from the minute your kid gets tech that this is not something that goes in bedrooms, it's a lot easier to enforce and a rule worth having.
My gosh, I've missed that boat completely. Okay, you say as adults, we need to show our own coping skills. We can't just talk about it. We have to do it. We kind of touched on that one before.
Yep. No, I think, it's don't talk about it, be about it is my favorite saying from a chocolate wrapper.
That's a good one. And other funny thing that I heard you say in another podcast was when your daughter told you that you needed to be a grown-ass woman.
Yes.
And that really cracked me up because my daughter says certain things like that to me.
Yeah, no, she said you need to be a grown-ass woman. I was having as we say in my family, a crap attack over something small. And she was like, Mom, you are a grown-ass woman. You can handle this. It was great.
Oh, that's so good. I just love that. Okay. So as we wrap up, if listeners want to find you, where can they find you?
So my website is drlisadamour.com, drlisadamour.com. My podcast is Ask Lisa, The Psychology of Parenting. My co-host Rena Ninen and I answer questions from parents every week. And then I'm at Instagram at lisa.damour. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook, but my website can get you everywhere.
Oh my gosh, you guys have to get all of these books. They're so good. They're sort of just like parental Bibles.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Oh my God, like the
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was an honor to be with you.
I just want everyone to think about what they can start doing today. One small step to deepening our connections with our teenagers and I can't even read right now. I want everyone to take one small step of deepening our connections with our teens and for midlife women to take a deep breath who are raising teenagers. I want to thank Lisa for highlighting the tools and strategies and the research on how we can raise more connected, capable, and compassionate adolescents. Thank you, Dr. Lisa Damour, for saying yes and becoming a new friend of the Flexible Neurotic podcast.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you
It was
so
great to be
much.
with you.
I think there's some crazy statistic that 75% is not gene-based. It's lifestyle-based.
So can we talk about the anti-inflammatory eating?
Yeah, we're going to do that right now.
That's the biggest thing. And that's part of the reason why I started it for other reasons, but it's really changed everything in my life by eating this way. And it's